And of course, I told you that artificial intelligence, the Internet of Things, innovation is appending all the sectors of the world. From human health, medical science, engineering, just name it, including journalism. Did I tell you that, a couple of months back, I saw a news anchor in the name of Kim, reading news in South Korea? Yeah, it's happening. I mean, disruption is across the board. And that's why this morning we just want to have some form of conversation around the nexus between engineering and artificial intelligence and how this industry is coping and how. Well, Engineer Makoha Okere is the Director of Compliance and Enforcement at the Engineers Board of Kenya. EBK is a market regulator, and he's joining us this morning to help us in this conversation. He's pretty young. I mean, he's been in this trade for, he told me, about more than 15 years. And so he knows and he has seen it all. Thank you very much indeed, Makoha, for joining us. Help us understand what is disruption doing to engineering as we know it?
Thank you, Bwana Brian, for having us in this show. First of all, just to pick up from the introduction, you talked about disruption and what the president of the US, Donald Trump, through putting up of the tariffs, increasing the tariffs by 10%, that already is disruption. It's going to disrupt the global supply chain.
Yes.
And even in terms of industrialization, in terms of manufacturing. So when you talk about technologies, the modern technologies, the emerging technologies, of course, they have two elements of it. One is their opportunities, and of course, there's also the other side where they can be a demerit. And engineering, as we know, is the application of science, mathematical principles, in terms of solving problems facing humanity in an economic way, sustainable way. And the whole essence of engineering is sustainable growth and development. Sustainable growth and development, which means distribution of opportunities, creation of employment, and definitely making life better. If we just talk about engineering and nexus with AI across various sectors of the economy, you look at transport, how mobility can be a factor of production. For instance, if you're working in Mombasa and here in Nairobi, you take a very short time to reach here. So already in terms of mobility, and even if it is agriculture, use of smart technologies. So we are looking at emerging technologies as a way of improving lives. We're looking at emerging technologies and engineering as a way of lifting many people out of poverty and increasing the wealth of a nation. We are looking at emerging technologies. You talked about Internet of Things to increase efficiency in the way we are doing things. And definitely in terms of meeting our national developmental goals. And so there are very, very many aspects in terms of engineering and AI that have to be considered. And I think with time we'll be able to say that we are actually leveraging on these technologies.
Being in the industry for the last 15 years, I mean, has given you a lot of exposure and knowledge on this critical industry. And the biggest innovation in this industry has been happening in the last 5 years. What would you say is the biggest shift from engineering as we have known it traditionally and engineering as it is being defined today?
Thank you. So we need to go back to the 17th century to look at the progression in terms of the first industrial revolution, the second, the third, the fourth, and now we're actually going to the fifth. So the first industrial revolution, we are looking at the steam engine. and mechanization. Then we moved to electrification. Then we moved to automation. That is the third. And now the fourth industrial revolution, we are looking at the nexus between physical, biological, matter, and how when we talk about issues about ChatGPT, we talk about the 3D printing and so on and so forth. And now when we talk about the fifth industrial revolution, we'll be talking about smart cities and a smart way of doing things. So there's been a tremendous shift, and technologies are evolving at extremely very, very high speed. Just the other day, we were talking about these computers. Now we are talking about nanotechnology and the use of microchips. So these technologies there's a lot of innovation, a lot of investments in the last 5 years. If you look at some of the global players, for instance, USA, China, UK, they have invested trillions of shillings in terms of research and development in advanced technologies. You look at even in terms of medical science, now we have organs that can actually be bioprinted. You look at infrastructure, we have houses that can be printed, 3D printed houses, as well as bridges. And even you talked about information. We are talking about big data. So there's quite a lot of information, and this information is being used now for making critical decisions. So there is an advancement in terms of technology. So the question is, how are we then leveraging or using this technology to our advantage? Of course, there are advantages and disadvantages. Advantages in the sense that, as mentioned earlier, there is increase in terms of ease of doing business, efficiency, increase in productivity, because now you spend little time in producing quality products. But on the other hand, also, it has its own disadvantages. For instance, even issues about employment. There are challenges in terms of technology coming over and decrease in terms of jobs. There's also another challenge in terms of digital divide, because you find we can call it probably knowledge slavery, because we have countries that are advanced in terms of technology, and we have countries that are still lagging behind. So he who owns data then controls the world. So we find that we are still trying to catch up with this evolving technology. I think in our country there's
and this is being made by the fact that we are consumers of technology. I mean, when you look at our production of innovation, it's negligible, at the global stage.
Yes, and that goes to answer the question of policy. Because these countries that have advanced, they have made a deliberate effort in terms of investing in research and development. There's a huge budget. If you look at some of the strategies that have been deployed by these countries, US, China, and US, and UK, they have put research and innovation at the core of it. In developing countries, our country, for instance, we have made strides. Not all is lost, because if you look at, if we talk about the M-Pesa, we also talk about M-Pesa. I think that is something that we can build on. Of course, there's quite a lot that we should have done in terms of innovation. Even during COVID, you remember we had a number of students, I think from KU and other universities, working together with the other in the private sector to come up with the ventilators and so on. So that element of innovation or Kenyan spirit is there. So the issue is, how do we upscale this innovation, and how do we then leverage on the innovations? How can we multiply, for instance, the coming up with the patents, increase in innovation, so that then we commercialize these innovative ideas that we have to production. So we have very good students, we have very good ideas, we have very good innovations, but I think the disconnect in terms of real problems that are being addressed in the industry and the overall policy framework. The government has come up with the Artificial Intelligence Master Plan, I think recently, not more than a month. Yes, that was
Thursday last week.
Yes.
The 5-year AI strategy.
AI strategy. So that's a very good direction to begin with, because now it talks about issues about capacity building, talks about the digital infrastructure network. It talks about the governance, the regulatory and policy, frameworks. Because when we talk about AI, even it's to do with national security, national cohesion, national welfare, and how can we leverage on technology to bring an equitable society. So, in a nutshell, there are strides that have been made, but there's still quite a lot. How do we then make a deliberate effort in terms of investing in, for instance, talent development? Are we able to map out and to know this is where we need to invest in terms of education, in terms of infrastructure? Of course, the government has talked about 100,000 fiber optic cable in terms of the infrastructure, but we need to do a little bit more so that if Kenya dreams to be the regional hub or the continental hub in terms of IT, in terms of artificial intelligence, then it is our responsibility to do more in terms of research and development, in terms of development of adequate policies that address human capacity. For instance, even the young population, we have a median age of 19 years. So these are the people who can actually drive change and use artificial intelligence to solve problems that we have, for instance, food security, even climate change. If we harness our young people to be able to address these challenges that we are facing as a nation through AI. So I think what needs to be invested more would be the enabling environment, in terms of funding, in terms of the policies, and in terms of, linking the academia with the industry to be able to spur and have sustainable development in our country.
You have mentioned countries, that are charting the way when it comes to innovation, artificial intelligence, Internet of Things. China is a leader in this, the US, South Korea,
yes.
Germany, among other countries.
Yes.
And when you look at the gap between application of innovation between the rich nations and the poor nations, yes. I mean, it's very wide. And so what do we then need to do to ensure that in the engineering field, we close that gap as fast as possible?
Thank you. It is true that the countries that have invested, as I mentioned earlier, they are way ahead. And these are, deliberate government efforts by these countries to invest in the emerging technologies. And in terms of artificial intelligence and emerging technologies, of course, there's still a long way to go, but this gives us an opportunity as a country to close that gap. Why? Because we have an advantage in terms of the young population that we have, that we can actually work in terms of knowledge and talent management. We are talking about also the regulatory framework, as mentioned, in terms of getting the right policies and the guidelines to develop and leverage on this. Just to bring the message home, UK 2023, they came up with a strategy by 2030 in terms of ICT, and they are investing close to 60 trillion Kenya shillings, UK. China, I think, also is close to 65 trillion Kenya shillings. The question is, how much as a country are we investing in terms of artificial intelligence and emerging technologies. How much is in the budget? If you look at the budget policy statement recently, how much is it going in terms of artificial intelligence? So there has to be deliberate investment in terms of putting the infrastructure, because now for us to have a competitive edge as a country, as a nation, to have a competitive edge in the continent, we need then to address those particular issues in terms of digital infrastructure, that we are talking about connectivity, that as many people as possible get internet access, and an aspect of inclusion, because now we are talking about other areas in the country that are not, they are not able to get internet access. So we're talking about digital inclusion, so that no one is left behind. So that is one. Secondly, we talk about some of the policies that we are going to develop. We have a policy framework that we can evaluate to the very end. For instance, the hubs that we are developing, and as a country, are we able to quantify and say, out of this rollout of this digital infrastructure system, then we're able to have this number of startups. If there are 1,000 startups, they've been supported, and they've been able to grow, exponentially. And these are the number of patents that we have actually produced as a country through research and development. So it has to be deliberate. So the exact evaluation framework in terms of business opportunities, how are we going to create opportunities in this digital economy? So that is the second thing. The third thing is to link problem solving, the current problems that we are having as a country, whether it is in terms of food security, whether it is water, whether it is industrialization. Then we link these problems to how we are addressing them as a country. That's why we need to have the academia on board, we need to have the regulators on board, we need to have investors on board, so that there is a deliberate linkages, because sometimes it's the integration between the problems in the industry and the solutions that are being offered. Another thing would be, in terms of the legal framework, we have the Data Protection Act that talks about data, because data is going to play a huge role. We share so much data, but how safe is our data in terms of even as a country? So we need to address the issues about data. How can we leverage on data to make informed, data-driven, evidence-based decisions? And still on infrastructure, the issue of about data centers, because when you talk about the Internet of Things, we are talking about how can we interconnect, all these gadgets speaking to each other. For instance, we're talking about electrical cars and smart cities. But when we talk about smart cities, let's give a practical example here in Nairobi. We have the boda, and the boda culture. We are talking about roads, we're talking about footpaths, we're talking about even the river itself, Nairobi River. So when we talk about Nairobi being a smart city, what is going to entail for it to become a smart city? One is to have an integration in terms of even the roads that we're having, where we have the non-motorized transport system, cleanliness in terms of the city, and even the broadband connectivity. And even the culture, because, for instance, when we talk about smart infrastructure and smart vehicles, and then we need to deal with the boda culture. So all these require integration in terms of planning. You've seen instances whereby a road is constructed, and then after a while, there is need to
other service providers digging up to lay cables and all that.
So that one also interferes with the resilience and the lifespan of this particular infrastructure. So there has to be an integration in terms of planning, and the roads, the sewerage systems, an element of planning to increase efficiency. Another thing then would be even in terms of growth of the economy, how then are we going to use these emerging technologies to our advantage? We talked about it being a national security issue. We've seen how artificial intelligence can also be used even to the disadvantage. Now, as we'll be gearing up towards the election, you find people will start using misinformation. You know, we have deep fakes where there are voices that are imprinted to send a wrong information. That is one. We have cyber crime and cyber security. We have people, especially in the financial sector, where people have lost quite a lot of money. So there's quite a lot even in terms of cybercrime and cyber security that needs to be dealt with. Finally, there's also an aspect of mental health because too much of AI, too much of technologies, too much of the phones that we have, it also brings an element of mental health. So what is the balance? What are the ethical considerations of AI? You know, some countries are also actually developing robots that can carry babies. So what is the ethical consideration in terms of AI and our cultural point of view? So the bottom line is, how can we use AI to our advantage to deal with the inequality, to deal with the climate change, to deal with poverty, so that we can prosper as a country. So this gives us a very good opportunity as a country to leverage on AI so that we can leapfrog just as other countries have done.
I've heard you. I mean, there must be collaboration between the private and the public sector in ensuring that we go to the right direction. Do you feel that is happening?
There is, of course, collaboration between different stakeholders, because when we talk about engineering, you talk about AI, it doesn't exist in a vacuum. Mm-hmm. For instance, in engineering, we have the regulators, the Engineers Board of Kenya, to license and register engineers. Then we have the academia, who produce these engineers and other professionals in that space, in the industry, AI. Then we have the private sector. We have the policy makers, who are the very, very important, mm-hmm. Who are actually developing these strategies and policies. So there's that industrial linkage. That collaboration is extremely important, mm-hmm. Because there are many, many aspects in terms of leveraging on emerging technologies. There is a lot that has been done, but so much more needs to be done, especially on the policy framework, mm-hmm. and the issue about capacity building. I think Nigeria, their strategy is to produce 1 million AI professionals. 1 million. 1 million. 1 million. Mm-hmm. AI professionals. So as a country...
By when?
I think we need to confirm the policy, mm-hmm. But I think it should be by 2030. To be able to confirm.
So even about 5 years from now?
5 years, yes.
So this translates to about 200,000 AI professionals every year.
Every year.
And of course, bearing in mind that Nigeria has a bigger population,
yes.
almost 200 million people.
Yes.
That is... It's possible for them to do that. But what about us?
Yes, we can still do it. It is possible. Mm-hmm. Why? Because we have very brilliant young men and women, the young age. As you know, there's a Kenyan spirit, where if you find any Kenyan in a very far part of the world, this Kenya will find him is thriving, he's solving problems. Kenyans generally are engineers. So how can we then tap and leverage on this young population? How can we make it deliberate? And we talk about exporting, people, our brothers and sisters, they go to work in the Middle East. Most of the time they work in hotels, they work in this as house helps and so on. Why can't we change that, mm-hmm. and change that mentality and produce a workforce and produce AI professionals if it is 1 million, if it is 2 million, that we can now export to other countries. Instead of just exporting domestic workers, as a nation, we train them, we empower them, we invest in them. These Gen Zs, we invest in them so that they can go out in the country and actually solve many problems, and that will be a foreign exchange to us. So we can actually produce
India
this.
is really doing that in a big way. And I support you. I mean,
yeah.
I don't see the reason why we cannot do that. We have the advantage of demography. I mean,
Yes.
you have a population of, majority of Kenyans are between the ages of 17 and 40 years. And so we have an opportunity whereby we can start exporting qualified and professional labor into the global labor market. But saying these,
Yes.
You see, when you look at, for example, the Engineering Act, it was last reviewed when, in 2012?
That is the time it was enacted.
That was the time.
It has not been reviewed.
That is the time it was enacted.
Yes.
2012. And we are talking about 13 years ago.
Yes.
Do you think the Engineering Act, as it was enacted then,
Yes.
reflect the realities of today?
Thank you, Brian. Well, I think the most important thing is what we've learned, even COVID taught us, is the need to be agile, the need to be flexible, the need to adapt with the current and future needs. And when the Act came into place, at first, Brian, the engineering was regulated under a previous act, that's CAP 530 of 1969.
Yes.
Then came Vision 2030.
1969.
1969. So all along it has been it was the Engineers Registration Board, which was registering engineers and technologists and technicians. Now, when the late President Mike Kibaki developed the economic recovery strategy,
the ERP.
Yes, ERP, and then coming up with Vision 2030. Now, based on that also, engineering
the ERP was in 2004.
Yes.
Up to around 2010.
Yes.
Then we embarked on a Vision 2030 implementation.
Yes.
We're supposed to go all the way up to 2030.
2030. So now also the board sat down and looked at the strategic direction the country is taking. So the Engineers Act of 2011 was now developed to have a broader view in terms of mandate, because it's more than registration. It's also developing and regulating the overall practice of engineering. And engineering cross-cuts all the sectors of the economy, whether it's ICT, whether it is energy, transport, agriculture, food, blue economy, name it. So now we have in our register engineers from all disciplines. We have marine engineers, we have mechatronic engineers, we have aviation engineers, we have electrical engineers, mechanical engineers. So to answer your question, Brian, I think in terms of future, because the jobs that we are talking about now, in future, some of the jobs will be non-existent. Yeah. For instance, even, right now we have chatbots. There's a hotel, I think is in China or South Korea, where you just go in, there's no reception, there's no receptionist. You just go in, you maybe face recognition or biometrics, then you go to your room, and then in case you need food, you just log in on the computer, and then there's a robot that brings you food or water, and even servicing of food. So you find only one person or two people in the hotel. So you see where we are going, we are talking about robotics, we're talking about, search engines and so on and so forth. So now, as a country, we'll need to consider the kind of problems that are going to come or opportunities that are going to come, so that then we align ourselves to the global best practices, and then we may need now to amend so that we look at these are the kind of professionals we are going to have. For instance, as an electrical engineer, there are so many sub-disciplines even in electrical engineering. You see, we have telecommunications, we have electronics, you know, even power systems. Now, even as we are talking about AI, there are going to be even more specialists. Of course, the electrical principles, the engineering principles, they remain the same. But now we are going to have, probably in future, we may have AI engineers, you know, robotics engineers, you know. So we will be able to cross the bridge once we reach there. But I think as a country, we need to put that in mind that in future, some of these jobs, even for instance, our learned friends, and this is with respect to, you know, we may be having a situation whereby we have AI advocates, okay, or AI secretaries.
Well, they're happening.
Yes.
They're in China.
They're already there.
Go to the city of Nanjing or Shenzhen.
Yes.
You find everyone there. And that's why we need really to discuss about, when we talk about the future.
Yes.
The future of technology is not 5 years from now. It is not 2 years from now.
Yes.
The future in technology is tomorrow. Because every day technology is changing and taking a different phase and, of course, interfering with our everyday life.
Yes.
And so when you look at engineering, as it is now, you know, the different disciplines in engineering,
yes.
Which sector do you think is mostly affected or is likely to be affected by artificial intelligence in the next 5 years?
Thank you, Brian. So the future, you said, is tomorrow. I would like to still add, is not only tomorrow, but the future
today.
is now, is actually happening. And more or less, all the sectors of the economy are going to be affected by AI and the emerging technologies. All, probably it's going to be the magnitude or to what extent technology is going to affect. Because if you talk about infrastructure, as mentioned earlier, we are talking about 3D houses, you know, 3D houses that are printed. We're talking about bridges, 3D printed bridges. You talk about fintech, financial sector, you know, now we are moving towards Bitcoin and so on and so forth. Let's talk about even medical engineering. You have telemedicine, whereby even a surgery, of course not all of them, but a surgery can be performed, you know, under instructions, probably from someone living, a doctor who is far, and then there are very highly specialized equipment and robots that can increase precision. You know, talk about agriculture. We're talking about smart farming and smart agriculture. We are talking about sensors. For instance, in Israel, they have really deployed smart agriculture systems in the entire value chain, even the soil, to know adequate data in terms of the soil structure and the humidity and the fertility level and so on and so forth. So it's going, even in education, you know, we are going to have virtual classes. So technology is going to virtually affect every sector of the economy, even national security. By the way, there is a way in which now everything is going to come down to national security. Why? Because all this data, whether it is in TikTok, whether it is in Facebook, whether it's in Instagram, is out there. But now it becomes a national security issue when there is data breach by other countries. It becomes something on sovereignty of a country. So in a nutshell, technology is going to virtually affect all the sectors of the economy. However, the question is, how are we positioning ourselves as a country? How are we strategically positioning as a country ourselves so that we make this technology to be our advantage? We use it for economic growth and development. And remember, there's a difference between growth and development, because growth, we're talking about increase in number of roads, increase in number of hospitals, but development, we're talking about decrease in terms of inequality. We're talking about increase in terms of economic opportunities and employment opportunities. We're talking about conservation to the environment, because when we develop as a country, then we also are talking about conservation of the environment for sustainability. So the sectors that are going to be most affected perhaps would be the ones where you know, there's human interaction, you know, the manual for instance, the receptionists and so on and so forth. But at the end of the day, we will still need the human person. Why? Because an artificial intelligence machine cannot reason the same way with a human. For instance, if you see
but there is also an argument that machines perform better
yes.
than human beings. But they have to be designed to perform by human beings. So, you know, throughout the value chain, I mean,
yes.
the interaction of human beings, I mean, cannot be erased. And that is a reality.
Yes.
But it can be minimized.
Yes.
And that's where I know you are going.
Yes.
So we talk about jobs that are going to be non-existent in the next 10 years.
Yes.
Jobs that are not going to be there. You see, you go to some streets, you go to San Francisco, you see self-driving cars on the road, taxis. You go to Shenzhen, you see railway or metro systems that are self-driven. You see taxis, you see buses. Right now, I know they are putting into mass distribution the system that we know maglev trains. Okay, and so you realize that professionals like drivers, they're not likely to be, their demand is likely to reduce as we go by. Are we looking at some disciplines within the engineering industry where some disciplines will require less and less professionals as we go by?
Yes, definitely. As you have mentioned, this disruption is either a blessing to us or a cursing to us. And as you have said, of course, technology is going to bring a disruption to in one aspect. You've talked about loss of jobs. What I would like to mention on that is the aspect of relearning and learning and upskilling. Because as you have looked at the wave, whether we like it or not, the technology is going to come and affect us in one or another. So how am I going to relearn as a driver? How can I relearn, you know, because even that car itself, it's driverless. But at the end of the day, it will need maintenance. You know, probably then the driver would be able, the skill that would be required to be able to adapt, you know, so that by the time the driver is no longer needed, then there is an aspect of coding, an aspect of, you know, maintenance of that driverless car, an aspect of, you know, integration, you know. So the issue is not about the coming of technology. The issue is how are we going to adapt? And adaptability. And how are we going to leverage? Because if we leverage well, then technology then can even be used to create even more jobs. How? Once we focus on research and development, we're able to come up with new innovations, and we use this technology to even create more opportunities for growth and development. So I agree with you on one hand that there are some disciplines, there are some areas where with time, for instance, now we used to use the designs. You remember having the blueprint and using the T-squares. If you can see some of the engineering students, we used to carry them. Now we are going to use other programs, for instance, AutoCAD and so on. Now there are other highly specialized softwares that are coming that you don't need to use all those. So definitely there is an element of adaptability. But what I wanted to mention is, of course, that divide is there in terms of ourselves as a country. But then again, using it to our advantage, then it means a lot of research, it means a lot of capacity building, it means a change of the way we are doing things. For instance, even at curriculum level, we're talking about CBC. Are we able to integrate artificial intelligence and emerging technologies in CBC? These are the problems that we anticipate in future. So that we lay the education system with a view of these are the problems you are going to foresee. It's strategic management, strategic planning, strategic leadership. So in the next 30 years, these are the problems that we anticipate. What are the likely skills that we are going to need so that when our young men and women reach that age, they have a competitive edge, they have a competitive advantage, and they can compete not only local but also globally. So there's a skill and the education level. The second thing then would be at the, as we mentioned about the policy level, as we probably talk about coming up with a policy on AI and a legal framework. I'm sure the ICT ministry is working on that. But then again, is it customized towards our local needs? Because definitely we have different players who have different interests. You know, we're talking about our development partners, you're talking about financiers, talking about producers. And another thing also I didn't want to miss is on bias. Because remember, these technologies are developed elsewhere, but there's an element of technological bias. For instance, if the HR was to use an AI tool to sieve out the people who, in terms of recruitment, what kind of bias is it going to have? Because it can have a bias so that the people who are qualified are not given that opportunity. Why? Because of the element of bias. So there has to be all these aspects looked into, and this can be covered in the policy framework. So here at the board, we are committed, and that's why in May we are talking about engineering a digital world. The board is going to have an engineering partnerships convention at the Edge in insurance
in South Sea.
In South Sea. We're going to have a wonderful discussion and deliberations so that we can have concrete policy considerations on this, on these strategies that already we've developed, and the policy framework to take our country forward in terms of leveraging on the digital economy to spur development of our country.
I know the Engineers Board of Kenya, you know, has also made significant strides in trying to inculcate artificial intelligence, Internet of Things, innovation within the discipline of engineering. And I know, you know, that there are various collaborations between other institutes. Would you want to take us through that?
Oh yes, and that shows there is a lot of hope. There's a lot of potential. There's a lot of opportunity. Just recently, 2 weeks ago, we had a collaborative engagement with the Chinese Society of Engineers, between an MOU between Engineers Board of Kenya, Institution of Engineers of Kenya, and the Chinese Society of Engineers. We also have a collaborative framework with the Japanese. We are working on having another collaboration with the government of Japan, and also I think in a week's time or 2 weeks' time, we're also going to have a collaborative framework with Beijing engineers. So what does this mean? It means that our partners have identified something special in our country, and there is something cross-cutting, Brian. When the partners are coming, they always mention the young engineers, the young engineers. So we're asking ourselves that there's something special about our young population, the youth, that even other nations are admiring in us. So these are collaborative frameworks that we're having with other countries on especially research and development, on building of capacity. And I think in August, there's going to be on the sidelines of the, I think the UNICTAD conference, I think it should be in China, where there'll be more engagements at a national level, more bilateral engagement. So we are saying as a board, even as we are working on these developments, on this collaborative framework, even in those bilateral and multilateral agreements, let's have a way that we can develop capacity in terms of even deliberate research and development, deliberate building capacity of these young engineers, technicians, technologists, so that then as a country we have adequate capacity and the opportunities. So all this, they are providing us with creating opportunities for young people, so that then from there, as a country, they are the ones who are going to drive our country forward. And we look for more collaborations with other countries. We are talking about mutual recognition agreement with the under the East African community, where we have mobility of engineers across the East African community. We're talking about the Africa Free Continental Free Trade Agreement at the continental level, where we'll have mobility of engineers to practice across Africa.
And I like the fact that you're talking about, countries like Japan that are being attracted by our demographics. And you have an aging population in Japan. The average age of an engineer in Japan is about 60 years. And the average age of a Kenyan is about 28 years.
Yes.
And so how then do we take advantage of the prevailing situation in Japan to supply them with young engineers?
Yes. Thank you. That's a very, very important question, Brian. One, just to go to the statistics, in Kenya we have close to 30,000 engineers.
30,000.
And that 30,000 is different categories. We have graduate engineers who are approximately 25,000 graduate engineers. We have professional and consulting engineers. So professional engineers and then consulting engineers, roughly 5,000. So the thing is, how can we accelerate? We're talking about acceleration. How can we accelerate these 4,000, all right, professional and consulting engineers to increase to 30,000 professional and consulting engineers? Once we have this number of engineers, they'll be able to drive the economy. We can even be able to export these engineers to go and practice outside, to go and practice in Japan, to get the skills, to get the more exposure. And it's not just the engineers alone. We're talking about technologists. We're talking about technicians. How can we all this continue to... So we're talking about a program that the government can develop, and the body is working on a graduate engineers internship program, but we need resources in terms of upscaling, so that, like the doctors, it is mandatory for doctors to have their internship. After that, they are qualified medical practitioners. So the thing is, even engineers, all these projects that are going on in various sectors of the economy, we make it deliberate to increase the capacity, so that the projects that are going on, there's a project percentage sum specifically for developing the capacity. Once we have such, and we deploy them in county governments, in various parastatals, in various ministries outside the country, then as a population we use human resource as a treasure. Because most of the time, Brian, we talk about gold, silver, we talk about titanium, but we forget that the youth, the human resource, is our most important treasure. If we develop these engineers, the technicians, technologists, if we invest in them, then we have a wonderful treasure, not only to drive our economy, but also to export them outside the country. And that foreign exchange is going to even make our country not only become competitive globally, but also our country to contribute in terms of shaping the continental agenda as we're looking at Africa 2063.
You see, from predictive maintenance to design optimization, and of course autonomous systems.
Yes.
I mean, these are fields that are going to be highly high consumers of artificial intelligence, and it will require, a different form of thinking, a different form of training, a different form of upskilling. What is your advice, or what are you telling young people who are aspiring to be engineers? Which industry are you directing them to?
The advice that I'm giving to young engineers is there is opportunity. Engineering has a very, very bright future. Even though there are challenges, some of them to do with policy gaps, some of them to do with the institutional gaps and so on. For instance, even the structure at the county government level. Why I'm saying policy gaps is because we need to have county engineers in every county, and in every municipality to have engineers, adequate number of engineers. So that is a gap. But what I'm saying is there are opportunities that young engineers can leverage, and that requires us to go a little bit further, even as you are doing your studies at your different schools, and not just engineers alone, but even other professionals. It will require us to go a little bit extra mile as learners in terms of our studies to get the principles. But I would encourage you to think and go an extra mile. Some of these entrepreneurs, for instance, we talk about Bill Gates, we talk about Mark Zuckerberg. When they were still in the university, they were able to come up with the innovations. They were able to come up with companies. So I would encourage our young engineers, students, to not only, apart from the studies, which you're doing very well, to start thinking about the problems that you can solve in future, to start thinking about entrepreneurship, so that we need to have engineers not only who are just good technically, but also entrepreneurs, so that they are able to solve problems facing society, they're able to run businesses, they're able to be employers, because we are talking about unemployment, and engineering can bridge that gap by coming up with ventures, coming up with the entrepreneurship, making entrepreneurial. So the message is there are many, many problems facing society, whether it is climate change, whether it is food security, whether it is issues about water and so many gaps. And for engineering, that presents an opportunity. Those challenges are actually opportunities to solve the problems. His Excellency talked a very good plan, the bottom-up economic transformational agenda. Mm-hmm. If we just talk about it and relate it to engineering, bottoms up, in my view, is the local mwananchi producing stuff. Let's say if we talk about Mamboga, producing tomatoes, producing onions, producing, then all these are able to be consolidated. Then we have a system where there is value addition. So we are talking about producers. We need to try to shift from our mentality, our mindset, from a consumer economy to be a producer economy, so that even at local level we are producing onions, we are producing potatoes, we are producing whatever produce we have. Then we have value add, so that local production is going to accumulate and even to have at national level. Then we value add. That is now the bottom up. Mm-hmm. So that even in terms of engineering, now how are we going to add value? Because when you talk about the tariff, the president was talking about 10%. How do we 10% against the products that are being imported to the US? We can overcome that by also in our local situation, we're able to value add. All right, and that is not a new term in town. Mm-hmm. It is how can we be deliberate in terms of value addition for the products that we have. Since independence, the coffee that we have, the tea that we have, it is still, there's so much macadamia nuts we have, all these areas. How can we make them to be productive? Look at the fallow land that we have in Kilifi, Kwale, and so on, and even we talk about marginalized areas, Marsabit and Wajir. How can we leverage on this using artificial intelligence to make them actually produce? Can we turn a desert into a land of plenty, into a fruitful land?
And it has happened in China.
It has happened.
Gobi Desert.
Yes. So it means we have an opportunity, O'Brien, as a country, mm-hmm. to change the direction of our country through strategic, deliberate, and intentional efforts in terms of investment. There's a lot of governance issues, definitely, as a country. We are grappling with governance issues. We're talking about even financial management, because all these losses that we see, budget deficits, taxation, when we talk about the informal sector, you know, Kibandaski economy, you know, informal sector. All this can contribute a lot in terms of the GDP and in terms of the growth and development of our nation. How can we involve all these sectors? How can we involve the blessings that God has given us in terms of land, in terms of people, in terms of even our beaches, you know, Mombasa, the waves. We can turn that tidal energy to power our nation. We talk about Turkana, their water aquifers. Can we leverage on that so that we can become water secure, we can be food secure, and therefore as a nation we become a nation that lifted its people out of poverty and our people are able to prosper. So if we leverage on engineering and artificial intelligence through the deliberate policies, through governance and through talent development and investment, then we can turn the tide and make Kenya to move from third to first world country.
Very good. I mean, if you're just joining us, we're having, you know, very great conversation here with engineer Makoha Okere. He's the director of
Compliance and Enforcement.
Compliance and Enforcement. Oh Lord, I lost that word. He's joining us this morning so that he can help us understand the nexus between engineering and innovation. And we are talking about artificial intelligence, Internet of Things. And of course, this is really upending the traditional sectors as we know them, from agriculture to engineering to medicine. I mean, no market is safe from the interruptions, you know, caused by these new innovations. And that's why, you know, the conversation this morning that we're having here is how do we as a country enhance our adoption and, of course, our absorption of technology so that we ensure that we stay on the same line with innovation as well as development. That is the conversation we're having here. And I also just want to alert you that in the second hour of this conversation, we'll be discussing the Trump tariffs and their impact on countries like us, and of course how the world is responding to this. Remember also the president is on a tour of Mount Kenya counties. And our reporter, Abdiaziz Hashim, is, of course, tailgating that trip. And, of course, we shall be going there so that we can get to hear from him what to expect today. This is the kind of conversation we're having here. You're watching Biz Check live from our national headquarters here in Nairobi. We are taking a short break, and thereafter, we are back with more. Of course, now we are back in studio so that we can conclude on our conversation around engineering and innovation. Engineer Makoha Okere is the Director of Enforcement and Compliance at the Engineers Board of Kenya. He has been with us since 10 in the a.m. And of course now I want to hear from you before I leave you. What are your final remarks? Where do you see engineering going in the next 5 years?
Thank you, Brian, and thank you for the very great show that we had today. So what I'm looking at towards the future, from where I sit and I look at the future, I see there's great potential in our country. I see the emerging technologies, as we have discussed, it's an opportunity. You look at how it can be used in terms of solving problems in agriculture, in the medical field, in terms of precision medicine, in housing, even as the president is touring development tour, maybe next time would be printing the houses, you know. Printing
affordable houses.
Affordable houses.
It's cheaper and faster.
Yes, cheaper and faster. You know, a whole 18th floor, we just, you know, using emerging, we print it in a few, you know, it takes a very short time. We are looking at even in terms of smart ways of mitigating climate change. So I'm looking at those opportunities, and as a nation, how can we leverage on these opportunities? On the other hand, also, we know the innovations and the emerging technologies have their own drawbacks. For instance, compromising national security, bringing a divide, a digital divide between the developed countries and those ones who are not yet developed, and even within ourselves as a country, bringing that inequality and issues about ethics, you know. But the issue is opportunities. I'm looking at opportunities. As a country, we need to overcome I would say, the fear of failure. You know, we have very good innovators, innovating every day. We have, the other day, I think someone from, was it Western, developed a helicopter or something. We had a small boy during COVID developed the dispenser, you know. I think it was a standard D5. So we have innovators within ourselves, but let's have that culture that we can nurture innovators. We can give them a chance. We can develop that innovation mindset, entrepreneurial mindset. So as I conclude, definitely in the next 10 years, 20 years, 50 years to come, there'll be disruptions. And that is, we need to accept that as a way of life. There'll be disruptions. New technologies are coming at exponential speed. But how are we going to leverage on these disruptions? You know, it's like a sail. You cannot force the direction of the wind to change, but you can adjust your sail so that you reach your destination.
Very good.
So even as a country, we may not change the force of technology, but we can adjust our plans, our investments, our policies. And finally, here at the board, Engineers Board of Kenya has mentioned, we are planning to have the EPC next month, where we'll be talking about engineering a digital world. So we'll be looking at how can we come up with these policies. And finally, I'm also, as a master's student in Strathmore University Business School, and also president of our class, we'll be looking at how can we leverage on the linkages between academia, policymakers, the board here, how can we help the government to develop the policies on artificial intelligence and the strategies that the legal framework, how can we work together, research, ecosystem, how can we work together to build on these, capacities for sustainable development, so that as a country we can, as the national anthem says, plenty be found within our borders, plenty of opportunities, plenty of resources, plenty of innovations, and plenty of ideas, and what else?
And innovation.
And innovation.
Very good.
Thank you.
Engineer Okere. I mean, it's good to leave it at that point. Plenty be found within our borders, the wonderful words of our national anthem. It's great to have you this morning, and of course, giving us a bearing as to where this industry is going tomorrow and the day thereafter. Your time is highly appreciated, and of course, we're glad because of your insight.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Very good indeed. I mean, we've been talking to Engineer Makoha Okere. He's the Director in charge of Compliance and Enforcement at the Engineers Board of Kenya, giving us a hint of what is happening in the engineering industry and how this critical industry is being impacted by innovation, artificial intelligence, as well as other emerging issues. I mean, you're watching Base Check